wanted to ask you if you think the revelations from WikiLeaks, right, the U.S. diplomatic cables, before that Iraq and Afghan war logs, this massive trove of documents that have been released, Julian Assange talking about the critical issue of transparency, have played a key role here. I mean, in terms of Tunisia, a young university graduate who ended up, because there were no jobs, just selling vegetables in a market, being harassed by police, immolates himself. That was the spark. But also the documents that came out on Tunisia, confirming the U.S. knowledge, while it supported Tunisian regime, that it was wholly corrupt. And what this means from one country to another, Yemen as well. Do you think there is a direct relationship?
Well, actually, the fact of the matter is the WikiLeaks are not really telling us anything dramatically new. They're providing confirmation often of reasonable surmises. Tunisia was a very interesting case. So the ambassador did have one of the leaks comes from the ambassador, July 2009, and he describes Tunisia. He says it's a police state with little freedom of expression or association, serious human rights problems, ruled by a dictator whose family is despised for their corruption, robbery of the population, and so on. That's the assessment of the ambassador. Not long after that, the U.S. singled out Tunisia for an extra shipment of military aid. Not just Tunisia, also two other Arab dictatorships, Egypt and Jordan, and of course Israel, that's routine, and one other country, namely Colombia, the country with the worst human rights record in the Western Hemisphere for years, and the leading recipient of U.S. military aid for years, two elements that correlate quite closely, has been shown. Well, that was this tells you what the understanding was about Tunisia, namely police state, bitterly hated dictator, and so on. But we send them more arms afterwards because the population's quiet, so everything's fine. Actually, there was a description by a very succinct account of all of this by a former high Jordanian official. He's now director of Middle East research for the Carnegie Endowment, Marwan Muasher. He said, this is the principle. He said, there's nothing wrong, everything is under control. Meaning, as long as the population is quiet, acquiescent, maybe fuming with rage, but doing nothing about it, everything's fine, there's nothing wrong, it's all under control. That's the operative principle.
He's a former Jordanian diplomat.
Former Jordanian official, high official.
What about what's happening now in Jordan, what you think is going to happen, and also in Saudi Arabia, how much it drives this, and what you feel Obama needs to do and what you think he actually is doing?
Well, Jordan, the prime minister was just replaced. He was replaced with an ex-general who seems to be, is claimed to be moderately popular, at least not hated by the population. But essentially nothing changed. There are changes of the Jordanian cabinet frequently, and the basic system remains. Whether the population will accept that, whether the Muasher principle will work, nothing's wrong, everything's under control, that we don't know. Saudi Arabia is an interesting case. Saudi Arabia, the king of Saudi Arabia has been, along with Israel, the strongest supporter, most outspoken supporter of Mubarak. And the Saudi Arabian case should remind us of something about the regular commentary on this issue. The standard line and commentary is that, of course, we love democracy, but for pragmatic reasons, we must sometimes reluctantly oppose it, in this case because of the threat of radical Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, you know, there's maybe some, whatever one thinks of that. Take a look at Saudi Arabia. That's the leading center of radical Islamist ideology. That's been the source of it for years. The United States has, it's also the support of Islamic terror, the source for Islamic terror, the ideology that supports it. That's the leading U.S. ally, and has been for a long, long time. The U.S. supported U.S. relations, close relations with Israel, incidentally, after the 1967 war escalated because Israel had struck a serious blow against secular Arab nationalism, the real enemy, Nasser's Egypt, and in defense of radical Islam, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Egypt had been in a proxy war just before that, and there was a major conflict. And that's quite typical. Probably the most, going back to WikiLeaks, maybe the most significant revelation has to do with Pakistan. In Pakistan, the WikiLeaks cables show that the ambassador Ambassador Patterson is pretty much on top of what's going on. There's enormous, the phrase campaign of hatred against the United States is an understatement. Population is passionately anti-American, increasingly so, largely, as she points out, as a result of U.S. actions in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, the pressure on the Pakistani military to invade the tribal zones, the drone attacks, and so on. And she goes on to say that this may even lead to the what is, in fact, the ultimate nightmare, that Pakistan's enormous nuclear facilities, which incidentally are being increased faster than anywhere else in the world, that these there might be a leakage of fissile materials into the hands of the radical Islamists who are growing in strength and gaining popular support as a result of, in part, as a result of actions that we're taking. Well, this goes back to, this didn't happen overnight. The major factor behind this is the rule of the dictator Zia-ul-Haq back in the 1980s. He was the one who carried out radical Islamization of Pakistan with Saudi funding. He's set up these extremist madrasas. The young lawyers who were in the streets recently shouting their support for the assassin of the political figure who opposed the blasphemy laws, they're products of those madrasas. Who supported him? Ronald Reagan. He was Reagan's favorite dictator in the region. Well, you know, events have consequences. You support radical Islamization, and there are consequences.